Some places look empty only because sorrow has learned to sit very still inside them. A house can hold its breath for months, maybe years, waiting for the scrape of a chair, the cry of a child, or the sound of somebody brave enough to open a door. Out in Oregon Trail country, where the wind carried dust, pine smoke, and the old griefs of wagon roads, folks believed land could be bought with money. But anyone who ever loved a home knew better. A home had to be answered. Thomas Mercer rode up to the Briggs place at sundown, with the deed folded inside his coat and rainwater dripping from the brim of his hat. The ranch was supposed to be empty. That was what the banker in Willow Creek had said, with his neat mustache and dry fingers resting on the bill of sale. Empty pasture, empty house, empty barn, empty debts cleared by a man willing to take a risk on bad fencing and worse luck. Thomas swung down from his bay gelding, Jasper, and stood in the yard while the wind pushed at the loose porch screen until it tapped like a nervous hand. The place had gone gray with neglect. A woodpile leaned under a torn canvas. The corral gate hung from one hinge. 2 hens scratched beneath the wagon shed, as if they had survived by being too stubborn to die. Near the pump, a small blue hair ribbon lay half buried in mud. Thomas looked at it, then at the dark windows. He drew his coat tighter and stepped onto the porch. One board gave a low groan under his boot. Inside the house, something moved, not a rat, not wind. A child's breath caught sharp in the silence. Thomas stopped with his hand on the latch. "Who's in there?" No answer came, only the quick scrape of bare feet on floorboards. He pushed the door open. The smell met him first: cold ashes, damp blankets, old flour, and fear. In the corner beside the black iron stove stood 3 children, barefoot and thin as fence rails, staring at him like he had come with a rope. The oldest, a girl of maybe 9, held a rusted fireplace poker across her chest. A smaller boy clutched a cracked china hen under one arm. The youngest, no more than 4, had her fist stuffed in her mouth and a cough rattling in her little ribs. Thomas took one step back instead of forward. The older girl lifted the poker higher. "This is our house," she said, though her voice trembled. Thomas looked at their bare feet, blue-white against the cold boards. Then he looked at the folded deed inside his coat, feeling its paper edges like a sin. "Before we go further, tell me where you are watching from. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe so more folks can gather around these old frontier memories with us." Now let's return to Thomas Mercer and the children waiting in that cold ranch house. Thomas removed his hat slowly, the way a man might in church or beside a grave. "I reckon I owe you an apology," he said. "I was told nobody lived here." The girl's knuckles tightened around the poker. Her hair was brown, cut uneven at the ends, and tied back with a strip of flour sack. Men tell all kinds of things when they want land. Thomas did not answer quick. A quick answer would have sounded like a lie. "What's your name?" She watched him as if even a name might be stolen. "Clara," the boy with the china hen whispered. "Don't tell him." Clara's jaw set out. "That's Jonah, and that's Ruth." Ruth coughed again, a small wet sound that made Thomas's chest tighten. "Where's your ma?" At that, all 3 children changed. Clara's chin lifted too hard. Jonah looked down at the china hen. Ruth pressed closer to her sister's skirt. Thomas had seen that kind of silence before. It was the silence that came when a question had teeth. Clara said, "Shall be back." The stove was dead cold. On the table sat a tin plate with 3 kernels of parched corn and a heel of bread so hard it had tooth marks and no bite gone from it. The bucket beside the door was empty. There were 2 quilts on the floor, both thin, both damp at the edges from the rain that had slipped under the warped back door. Thomas thought of the banker saying empty. He thought of the cheap price. He thought of his own hands signing without asking much more. "All right," he said. "I'm going to bring wood in. We don't need you. That stove does." Clara's eyes narrowed. "You touch anything, I'll scream." "I expect you will," Thomas said. "I'll still bring wood." He turned his back on the poker and went out into the rain. The yard had darkened while he stood inside. Clouds dragged low over the hills, and the old barn leaned black against the last strip of western light. Thomas crossed to the woodpile, pulled the wet canvas loose, and found the top logs soaked, but the ones below dry enough. He carried an armload to the porch, then another, then a third. When he came back through the door, Clara still stood with the poker raised. Jonah had moved Ruth behind a chair, though he could not have defended a biscuit from a hungry dog. Thomas knelt by the stove. His knees complained. He had ridden hard for 3 days from Pendleton. He laid kindling, shaved curls from a split pine stick with his pocket knife, and struck a match. The flame showed the children's faces in golden shadow. Ruth leaned forward despite herself. Thomas saw Clara notice and harden against it. He fed the flame until it took. Then he stood and moved to the door. "There's a sack of beans in my saddlebag," he said. "Coffee too. Bacon, if it hasn't gone sour." Jonah's eyes lifted at the word bacon, then darted to Clara. Clara said nothing. "I'll bring it in," Thomas said. "I'll set it on the table. Your hands can touch it before mine do if that suits you." "Why?" The question was so bare he almost missed it. Thomas looked at the children, at the room where dust lay thick, except for the paths their small feet had worn between stove, table, and corner. "Because it's raining," he said. Clara stared at him. That was not enough of an answer, but it was the only one he had that would not shame her. He brought in the food. The beans would take too long, so he cut bacon thin and fried it in a skillet he found hanging from a nail. He mixed flour and water, found a pinch of salt in a crock, and made flat cakes that cooked hard at the edges and soft in the middle. Ruth crept close enough to watch the grease pot. Jonah kept the china hen tucked beneath his elbow like a treasure or a weapon. "Where'd you get that hen?" Thomas asked. Jonah's eyes widened. "It's Mama's. I won't take it. It's for eggs." Thomas looked at the cracked china bird, then at the 2 real hens outside. "Is that so?" Jonah nodded. "If I hold it, the brown hen lays better," Clara whispered. Jonah. But Thomas only said, "Then you'd best keep hold." When the food was ready, he put the first plate on the table and stepped away. Clara did not move. Thomas took off his coat, hung it over the back of a chair, and sat on the floor near the door, leaving the table to them. The children watched him for another long moment. Hunger won before trust did. Ruth reached first, then snatched her hand back as if the food might vanish. Clara took the plate and divided the bacon in 3 careful pieces, giving the largest to Ruth, the second to Jonah, and keeping the smallest for herself. Thomas pretended not to see. The rain thickened. It tapped against the windows and ran down the chimney in small hisses when drops found the fire. Thomas could have gone to the barn, if the barn roof held. He could have ridden back to town and demanded answers from the banker. He could have told himself this was not his concern. That land changed hands all the time, and children belonged to somebody else's trouble. Instead, he sat with his back against the door and watched 3 barefoot children eat like silence had been their only table manners for a week. When Ruth finished, she licked grease from her tongue and began coughing again. Not a passing cough, a deep one. Thomas looked at Clara. "How long has she been sick?" "She's not sick." Ruth coughed until her face reddened. Thomas kept his voice low. "I've got a blanket in my roll. Dry one. We have quilts. You have wet quilts." Clara's eyes flashed. "We have what we have." Thomas nodded once. He understood pride well enough. Pride had kept him alive some years and lonely all the rest. "Then I'll hang the quilts near the stove," he said. "Thou to have, only drier." Clara did not give permission, but she did not stop him. That night Thomas slept on the porch with his saddle for a pillow and the door open a hand's width so the stove smoke would draw right, and the children could hear if he moved. He woke twice to feed the fire. Each time he saw Clara sitting upright in the chair, the poker across her lap, fighting sleep. Once, Just before dawn, he heard Ruth whimper. Clara slid from the chair and tucked the dry blanket around the little girl's shoulders with such gentleness that Thomas turned his face away. Morning came gray and cold. The ranch looked worse in daylight. Fence posts leaned like tired men. The garden behind the kitchen had gone to weeds, though Thomas could see old rows beneath the tangle. A broken wash tub lay beside the pump. The barn door had been tied with rope. In the corral, a lame mule stood under the eave, ribs showing, one ear cocked, as if offended by life. Thomas pumped water until the rust ran clear. He washed his face and beard's stubble, then filled the bucket and carried it inside. Clara had the stove going. She had used less wood than was wise, but more skill than he expected. Jonah sat on the floor arranging 3 buttons, a nail, and the china hen in a line. Ruth slept under the blanket, her breath uneven. "Your ma's name?" Thomas asked. Clara took the bucket from him without hanks. "Phoebe Briggs." The name struck the room differently than the children's names had. It had weight. The deed in Thomas's coat said Briggs, of course. Silas Briggs had owned the ranch before debt, fever, and bank paper swallowed him. The banker had mentioned a widow only in passing, with a shrug that made her sound already gone. "Where is Phoebe Briggs?" Clara dipped a cup into the water. Her hand shook from the weight. "Town." "For how long?" "Since yesterday." "Why?" Clara's mouth tightened. "To get work." Thomas glanced at the empty pantry shelves. "And you were left alone?" "I'm 9. That doesn't answer me." She looked up, fierce and exhausted. She didn't know Mr. Vale would come. Thomas went still. "Banker Vale?" Clara nodded. "He came after she left. Said we had no right staying. Said if we were here when the new owner came, he'd have the sheriff pull us out. Said he sold the house, the barn, the pump, the beds, the stove." Her voice broke only on the last word. "He said, Mama should have read the papers better." Thomas hand closed around the cup he had not yet lifted. "The beds?" he asked. Clara looked ashamed, as if losing beds had been a failure of character. "He took the good feather 1 last month," she said. "Said it counted against interest." Thomas had known men like Edwin Vale, men who could skin a family with ink and call it lawful. A sound came from the yard then. Wagon wheels, slow in mud. Clara ran to the window. "Mama." Thomas stood so quickly the chair scraped. The wagon that rolled into the yard had 1 tired horse and a woman on the seat bent against the rain. She wore a brown shawl darkened with water, and her bonnet had lost its shape. Even before she stopped, Thomas saw how carefully she held herself, the way people do when pain has become something they cannot afford to mention. Phoebe Briggs climbed down from the wagon with a sack of meal in one hand and a bundle of mending in the other. She was not young in the girlish way town men praised, but she was not old. Hard years had drawn fine lines at the corners of her eyes and mouth. Her dress was patched cleanly. Her boots were split at the sides. Her hair, dark blonde and pinned low, had loosened in the rain. When she saw Thomas in the doorway, she froze. Clara ran past him. "Mama?" Phoebe dropped the mending and caught her daughter with one arm. Jonah came next, then Ruth, stumbling and coughing into the wet folds of Phoebe's skirt. Phoebe's eyes never left Thomas. "Children," she said, calm in a way that cost her. "Go inside." Clara clung tighter. "He made fire. He gave bacon." Phoebe's face changed at that, but only slightly. Hunger and gratitude and fear all crossed it like shadows. Thomas stepped off the porch into the mud, leaving the doorway open behind him. "Mrs. Briggs," he said. "Thomas Mercer, I know who you are." Her voice was low, not weak, low. "I was told the place was empty." "It is yours, Mr. Mercer." She held Ruth against her hip, though the child was too big to be carried easy. "We were leaving today." Clara made a sound. "Mama, no." Phoebe's hand settled on her daughter's head. "Inside." The children obeyed, but Clara stood just within the door where she could hear everything. Phoebe faced Thomas in the rain. "I had no quarrel with you," she said. "If you bought it legal, then you bought it. I asked Mr. Vale for 3 days to gather our things. He gave me one. I used it finding meal and a promise of laundry from Mrs. Acker. I meant to be gone before you arrived. Where would you go?" The question seemed to offend her more than if he had cursed. "That is my concern. You have 3 barefoot children and 1 sick." Her chin lifted, "Which is why it remains my concern. I won't have strangers measuring my children like poor cattle at a sale." Thomas absorbed that without flinching. He deserved some of it simply by standing there with a deed. "I'm not measuring them. Mr. Vale did. The church women did. The storekeeper did when he put our flour on the counter and waited to see if I had enough coins. Men measure women and children all the time in this valley. They just use softer words when they do it." Thomas looked toward the house. In the window, Jonah's small face vanished. "I won't put you out in the rain," he said. "You won't have to. I can hitch again after Ruth warms." "And go where?" Her eyes sharpened. "You already asked that. I'm asking again because there's no good answer." Phoebe looked beyond him at the ranch that had been hers and was now his. A bitter little smile touched her mouth and left. "There used to be," she said. The words sat between them, quieter than rain. Thomas removed the folded deed from inside his coat. The paper had softened at the edges from damp. He held it out, not toward her, but where she could see it. "I paid for land," he said. "Not the right to freeze children." Phoebe did not reach for the deed. "What do you want?" It was the right question. People who had lost too much learned to distrust kindness until it showed its price. Thomas looked at the broken gate, the empty wood rack, the wagon with its poor horse, the woman standing straight because bending would hurt worse. "I need this ranch made livable," he said. "You need shelter. Stay 30 days. Work if you choose. Don't if Ruth worsens. We'll make terms when nobody is soaked and frightened. Terms. I have no money. I didn't ask for money. That means you'll ask for something dearer later." Thomas' jaw tightened. He could not blame her for thinking it. "My mother raised me better than that," he said. Phoebe searched his face. Something in her wanted to believe him. More in her did not dare. From inside, Ruth coughed until Clara called, "Mama!" Phoebe turned at once. Thomas stepped aside from the porch stairs. She hesitated, then walked past him into the house that was no longer hers. For the next 3 days, they lived like people trapped by weather and pride. Thomas took the barn loft. The rain came through in 2 places, and mice had claimed the hay. He patched the worst of the roof with tar, paper he found in a barrel. He cleaned the stall for Jasper, rubbed down the lame mule, and fixed the corral gate with 2 new pegs cut from oak. Each morning he brought wood to the kitchen door and left it stacked straight. He did not enter until Phoebe said, "Come in," and most times she did not say it until the coffee had boiled. Phoebe worked even when Thomas wished she would sit. She washed every cup in the house with sand and hot water. She took down the curtains, beat dust from them, mended the torn edges and rehung them though they were faded to nearly nothing. She found 3 potatoes gone soft in a cellar bin and cut the eyes for planting. She made bread from meal and flour stretched thin with boiled beans. She turned Thomas's torn shirt cuff with stitches so small he had to hold it close to see them. The children watched him. Clara watched like a guard. She set Ruth's cup on the table before her own and hid half her bread in her apron for later. Though later never came because Ruth always found it. She asked Thomas questions that were not questions. How long does a man keep a ranch he bought cheap? Depends if he can make it stand. What if he can't? Then he was a fool to buy it. Are you? Likely. That almost made Jonah smile. Jonah was 6, maybe 7. with solemn eyes and a habit of touching door frames when he passed through them, as if counting exits. He followed Thomas at a distance, while Thomas repaired the pump handle and scraped rust from the hinges. He never asked to help. He only appeared with the wrong tool at the right time, offering a hammer when Thomas needed nails when Thomas needed a wrench, and once the china hen when the mule refused feed. "She makes things better," Jonah said. Thomas accepted the china hen and set it on the fence post. "Then she can oversee." After that, Jonah stood closer. Ruth had fever by the fourth night. Rain turned to sleet after supper, clicking against the windows like thrown gravel. Phoebe sat by the stove with Ruth in her lap, wiping the child's face with a damp cloth. Clara stood beside her, rigid with terror, while Jonah slept under the table with the china hen tucked beneath his shirt. Thomas came in from the barn carrying a lantern and stopped at the sight of Phoebe's face. "She needs a doctor," he said. Phoebe did not look up. "Dr. Haskell won't come without payment." "I'll ride. The bridge is out at Miller's Wash. I crossed worse coming here." She looked at him then. Her eyes were red from smoke and sleeplessness. "Why?" Thomas had one hand on the door latch, one on his hat. The answer should have been easy. Because a child was sick, because he was not a brute, because any decent man would. But under her question lay another. "Why spend yourself on us when the whole world has been teaching me we are burdens?" Thomas said, "Because Ruth asked for water and called me Mr. Taw." Phoebe blinked. From her lap, Ruth murmured in fever, "Mr. Taw brought bacon." Thomas looked away first. "I'll bring Haskell," he said. He rode into sleet so sharp it stung like sand. The road to Willow Creek had become a black ribbon of mud. Jasper fought the wind with his head low. Twice Thomas dismounted and led him through washes, where water ran fast over stones. By the time town lights appeared, he could not feel his fingers. Dr. Haskell was at the back of the Mercantile playing checkers with the sheriff. Thomas walked in dripping water on the floor. "I need you at the old Briggs Ranch." Haskell looked up over his spectacles. "For whom?" "Ruth Briggs. Fever and cough." The doctor sighed, not unkindly, but heavily. "That child was poorly last winter. Phoebe never lets them rest enough." Thomas took one step closer. "Mrs. Briggs has been keeping 3 children alive on air and courage. Get your bag." The storekeeper, Amos Greer, leaned from behind the counter. "That ranch ain't Briggs no more. Heard you bought it." "I did." "Then I'd be careful taking on strays. Widow Briggs owes half this town one thing or another." Thomas turned his head slowly. Greer's mouth stayed open, but no more words came. Sheriff Calder rose from his chair. "No need for hard looks, Mercer. There is if a child's sick and men are sitting warm, discussing her mother's debts." The room went quiet. Dr. Haskell closed his checkerboard. "I'll need my horse. You'll ride mine. He's saddled. And you?" "I'll take whatever nag you have and follow." The doctor studied him for a moment. "You always this cheerful?" "Only in weather." They reached the ranch near midnight. Phoebe opened the door before they knocked, as if she had been standing there listening to the storm for hours. She did not hang Thomas. She did not need to. Her eyes dropped once to his soaked coat, then returned to Ruth. Dr. Haskell examined the child by lamplight. Pneumonia was the word he finally gave, though gently. He left powders, instructions, and a warning that the next 2 nights mattered. When he asked about payment, Phoebe's shoulders stiffened. Thomas said, "Put it on my account." Phoebe's head snapped toward him. The doctor nodded and packed his bag. "Keep her warm. Steam if she tightens. Broth if she'll take it." After he left, Phoebe followed Thomas onto the porch. The sleet had softened to cold rain. Water dripped from the porch roof in silver strings. "I did not agree to debt," she said. "No, then don't make it for me." "I made it for Ruth. That is still a rope around my neck, if you hold the end." Thomas was tired enough that his patience thinned, but not enough to wound her. He leaned his shoulder against the porch post. My wife died owing a doctor. I paid it after she was buried. I would have paid twice to have a reason to call him sooner. Phoebe went still. The rain filled the silence between them. Thomas looked out toward the dark barn. I don't hold ropes on sick children, Mrs. Briggs. She folded her shawl tighter around herself. Your wife? Eleanor? The name came out rough from disuse. Phoebe's face changed, but she did not soften in the cheap way of pity. She only stood there with him in the cold. I'm sorry, she said. Thomas nodded once. Inside, Ruth coughed again. Phoebe turned back to the door, then paused. Thank you for riding. Thomas kept his eyes on the yard. She called me Mr. Tall, he said. Phoebe almost smiled. It was small, weary, and gone quickly, but it warmed something in him that sleet had not reached. Ruth lived. For 2 days, the house turned around her breathing. Phoebe slept sitting up. Clara carried water without being asked. Jonah fed the stove one stick at a time, whispering to each piece, as if instructing it not to fail. Thomas boiled water, held steaming pans near Ruth's bed, and rode to town again for horehound candy, because Dr. Haskell said it might ease her throat. When Ruth's fever broke, she woke near dawn and asked if the hens had remembered her. Phoebe covered her face with both hands. Clara cried without making a sound. Jonah brought the china hen and set it beside Ruth's pillow. She remembered hardest. Thomas went outside before anyone could see what that did to him. The morning was clean after so much rain. Sunlight lay pale across the yard. The pump handle shone where his hands had worn away rust. The hens fussed near the steps. From inside came Phoebe's low voice humming something he did not know. Not a hymn exactly, more like a tune for keeping fear from noticing where a person lived. Thomas crossed to the fence line and began work. The ranch needed everything. It needed post holes dug, rails split, the barn roof patched, the garden turned, the pump leather replaced, the chimney cleaned, the henhouse mended, the pasture cleared of deadfall, and the house chinked where winter wind had found cracks. It needed a man with money and 2 strong hands. It needed a woman who knew where every useful thing had been hidden from creditors and weather. Phoebe knew. There's a box of hinges under the north stall, she said one morning without looking at Thomas. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, holding a broken cupboard door. I looked there. You looked like a man. Try behind the loose board. He found them exactly there, wrapped in oilcloth. The next day she said, the creek fence won't hold cattle. Silas meant to fix it, but fever took him first. Silas was your husband? She was kneading dough. Her hands paused once, then continued. Yes, Thomas waited. He was a kind man, she said. Bad with numbers. Too trusting with men who wore good coats. Vela. Her mouth pressed thin. Among others, Thomas set the hinges on the table. The banker said Silas borrowed against the ranch. He did, for seed after the grasshoppers, then for Ruth's birth, then for winter feed. Debt breeds in dark corners, Mr. Mercer. By the time you light a lamp, it has had children. Thomas heard bitterness, but not self-pity. Phoebe did not speak like someone asking to be excused. She spoke like someone describing whether she had survived. What did you be for this? Her hands shaped the dough hard. Everything after, before Silas. She looked up then, surprised by the question. I taught school in Albany, she said, before I married. Only 2 terms. My father said a woman who could read contracts would frighten off a husband. Did it? No. I married a man who could not read them well enough. There was no cruelty in it, only sorrow. Later that afternoon, Thomas found a small trunk in the corner of the room Phoebe used with the children. Its lid was cracked, its brass lock missing. He had gone in to fix the window sash after she asked him to, and he meant not to look, but the trunk stood open. Inside lay a school primer, a folded black dress, a man's pocket watch with no chain, and a bundle of letters tied in blue ribbon, the same color as the ribbon he had found in the mud. Phoebe came in behind him. Thomas straightened at once. I wasn't prying. I know, She crossed the room and shut the trunk, not sharply. That watch was Silas's. It stopped the morning after he died. Could be repaired. Some things can. She looked at the window, not at him. Thomas lifted the sash and set the peg. I found a blue ribbon by the pump my first day, Clara's. She cut it from my wedding bonnet. Said Ruth needed something pretty when we sold the mirror. Why I sell the mirror? Phoebe gave him a look. So we wouldn't have to sell the stove. He had no answer for that. She touched the trunk lid with one hand. Her fingers were work-roughened, clean, and steady. Mr. Mercer, I need to know whether you meant 30 days truly. Yes, and after. I don't know. Then I do. Her voice stayed calm, but he heard the strain beneath it. I'll take laundry from town. Clara can help Mrs. Acker some mornings. Jonah can gather eggs if the hens improve. I'll repay the doctor. We'll leave before summer if I can secure a room. Thomas looked at her. A room for 4. I am Ziwi's. If has a roof. This house has a roof. It has your roof. The words stung because they were true. That evening, Thomas sat alone in the barn with Eleanor's locket in his palm. He had carried it for 4 years, wrapped in a piece of soft cloth. Inside was a tiny curl of brown hair and a pressed violet, gone nearly colorless. Eleanor had wanted a house full of noise, a baby, then another, a garden with beans climbing poles, curtains with yellow flowers. She had died before any of it came. Thomas had bought the Briggs Ranch because emptiness suited him. It had seemed honest. Land did not ask questions at night. Cattle did not look at a man and wonder why he had survived. An empty house could not lose more than it already had. Only the house had not been empty. A small voice came from the barn door. Mr. Mercer. Thomas closed the locket. Jonah stood barefoot in 2 short trousers, holding the china hen. You're supposed to have shoes on, Thomas said. They pinch Ruth. So Clara gave Ruth hers, and mine got holes. Thomas rubbed a hand over his face. Come here. The floor's cold. Jonah came but stopped a careful distance away. Is Mama going to jail? Thomas sat forward. Who told you that? Mr. Greer said if debts don't get paid, folks can get locked up. Clara said he's a lying old crow, but she looked scared after. Thomas felt anger rise, hot and immediate. No, he said. Your mother is not going to jail. You know? I know. Jonah studied him. Can bankers put children out? Thomas hesitated one breath too long. Jonah nodded, as if that was answer enough. Thomas leaned his elbows on his knees. Sometimes men with papers do hard things. But I own the paper now. Do you do hard things? I have. To your children? No. Jonah came closer and placed the china hen on Thomas's knee. She can watch you, he said. Then he turned and ran back to the house. The next morning, Thomas drove the wagon to Willow Creek. He bought shoes first, good ones, not fancy, sized by memory and guess. Boots for Clara, sturdy. Boots for Jonah, with room to grow. Soft shoes for Ruth, because her feet were small and still tender from fever. He bought calico, needles, lamp oil, coffee, sugar, salt pork, beans, seed packets, a new pump leather, and a sack of flour so heavy Amos Greer raised both brows. Stocking up for an army, the storekeeper said. For a household, Greer smirked. Widow Briggs still installed out there? Thomas set coins on the counter one by one. Mrs. Briggs and her children are under my roof. Your roof, is it? Funny how quick some widows manage. The store went quiet. 2 women near the ribbon shelf turned to listen. Sheriff Calder, standing by the stove, looked down into his coffee. Thomas placed his palm flat on the counter. Say her name with respect. Greer's smirk faltered. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. Now, Mercer, no call to get riled. Thomas leaned closer. A woman kept 3 children alive, while men with scales and ledgers picked at her house piece by piece. You will not make filth of her survival in front of me. One of the women inhales sharply. Greer flushed dark. This is my store, and those are my coins. Decide if you want them. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Greer reached for the flour sack. Anything else? Thomas looked toward the ribbon shelf. Among the bolts and spools hung one length of blue satin, not costly, but clean and bright as spring sky. That ribbon, he said. When he came back, the children were in the yard. Clara was hanging washed rags on a line. Jonah was trying to coax the brown hen into a crate. Ruth sat on the porch step, wrapped in Thomas's old coat, singing to a crooked stick. Phoebe came out wiping her hands on her apron. The wagon was full, her face closed. Mr. Mercer, Thomas climbed down. Supplies, I see that, for the ranch. Shoes are not for the ranch. He lifted the small bundle from the wagon bed. They're for feet that live on it. Clara had stopped moving. Jonas stared openly. Ruth dropped her stick. Phoebe's pride stood between them like another person. Thomas lowered his voice. I bought them because Jonah came to the barn barefoot last night, and because Ruth's cough worsens when she's cold, and because Clara has been walking like her soles are bruised. That's all. That is not all. There is money behind it. Then write it down, he said. Keep account. Pay if you must. But don't make them earn warmth to satisfy a world that has already taken enough. Phoebe looked at him for a long time. Then Ruth whispered, Mama, my toes hurt. Phoebe's eyes shut briefly. When she opened them, she took the bundle. Children, come. Thomas unloaded flour while Phoebe fitted shoes. Clara refused first. Mine are fine, Phoebe said. Lift your foot. Clara obeyed, cheeks burning. When the boots slid on, her face changed despite her effort to prevent it. She stood taller. She took one step, then another. She did not thank Thomas. She turned away and wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. Jonah walked in circles until Ruth laughed and coughed at once. Ruth's shoes were a little large, so Phoebe stuffed the toes with clean cloth. Thomas left the blue ribbon on the kitchen table without comment. That night, after the children slept, he came in for coffee. Phoebe had set a cup near the stove, covered with a saucer to keep it warm. He looked at it, then at her. She was mending Clara's old stockings by lamplight. The blue ribbon lay beside her, untouched but not put away. Greer spoke poorly today, Thomas said. Her needle paused. I answered. She resumed stitching. That will cost you. Maybe you don't know this town. I know men. Phoebe pulled the thread through. Men do not like being ashamed. No, neither do women. Thomas accepted that. He sat across from her, both hands around the coffee cup. The house was quiet, except for the tick of stove metal, and Ruth's faint breathing from the next room. Vale coming around? He asked. He sent notices before. There's nothing left for him to notice now. There might be. Phoebe looked up. Thomas took the D from his pocket and laid it on the table. I want to understand what I bought. You bought our failure. Note. I bought a ranch at a price lower than honest. Her eyes held his. I went to the courthouse, he said. Val folded fees into the note. Storage fees for furniture he took. Penalties after Silas died. Charges for posting sale bills that were never posted where you might see them. Color drained from Phoebe's face. Thomas continued carefully. I don't know law well enough yet, but I know stink. Phoebe's hand moved to the table edge. Can it be undone? I don't know. Hope hurt her. He saw it. She rose so quickly the chair scraped and crossed to the stove. If it cannot, do not bring it to me half-made. I want. You already have. Thomas stood. Mrs. Briggs. She turned on him, eyes bright. Do you know what hope is to children, Mr. Mercer? It is cruel if it comes without bread. Clara has stopped asking when we can sleep in beds because she thinks asking caused them to be taken. Jonah hides nails in his pockets in case he has to build us a room somewhere. Ruth tanks the stove each morning, so do not come to me with courthouse stink. unless you mean to put your hands in it." Thomas took the blow because it was deserved. Then he said, "I mean to." She stared at him. He put the deed back in his pocket. "I don't know whether I can save what was yours, but I can look Vale in the eye while I try." Phoebe's anger wavered, exhausted by its own weight. "Why would you?" she asked. It was the same question again, only deeper. Tom looked toward the room where the children slept. "Because I came here wanting emptiness," he said, "and God me by giving me a house full of need." Phoebe's mouth trembled. She turned away before he could see more. The days warmed slowly. April came with greens showing under the dead grass. Phoebe turned the garden with a hoe that had a cracked handle Thomas later replaced. Clara planted beans in straight rows and told Ruth not to drown them with too much water. Jonah built a small fence of sticks around the onion bed to keep hens out, then appointed the China hen captain over the real ones. Thomas repaired the barn roof. He taught Jonah how to hold a nail without smashing his thumb. He showed Clara how to check a horse's hoof for stones after she admitted she missed riding the mare her father had sold. He carved Ruth a little wooden cup because her hands shook when she held tin. Phoebe made the ranch move. Laundry appeared on the line, white against blue sky. Bread rose beneath a cloth near the stove. The broken wash tub became a planter for mint. The porch was swept each morning. The spare room, once filled with mouse chew sacks, became a sleeping room for the children after Thomas built 2 rope beds and repaired a third from the barn loft. The first night, the children slept in beds. Ruth cried. "Too high," she whispered. So Phoebe dragged her mattress to the floor beside them, and Thomas, hearing through the wall from the kitchen where he sat with accounts, went out to the barn without taking his coffee because a man had no right listening to that tenderness. Still, something changed. Phoebe began saying his name. Not always, not softly at first, but Mr. Mercer became Thomas one morning when the pump handle slipped and struck his wrist hard enough to split skin. "Thomas, hold still," she said, taking his hand before either of them considered it. He held still. She cleaned the cut with boiled water, wrapped it in linen, and tied the knot with her teeth because both hands were busy. Her fingers were cool, her brow furrowed close to his hand. A strand of hair had fallen along her cheek. "It's not bad," he said. "I did not ask." "No, you talk too much when you're hurt." "I've been accused of the opposite." Her mouth almost curved. He watched her tie the bandage. There were scars on her knuckles, small burns near her wrist, a callus where a pen might once have rested, and where a hoe now did. When she released him, he did not pull away quickly. Neither did she. Then Clara came in carrying eggs, and Phoebe stepped back. "5, Clara announced. 6 if Jonah didn't sit on one." "I was helping," Jonah called from outside. Thomas looked at Phoebe. She was busy folding the remaining linen, but color had risen in her face. That same week, Vale came. He arrived in a polished black buggy with yellow wheels, dressed as if mud were a rumor that happened to lesser men. His horse was sleek, his gloves pale, his smile practiced. Thomas saw him from the barn and set down his hammer. Phoebe came to the porch. Clara stepped behind her. Jonah vanished, likely to gather nails or weapons. Ruth, healthier now, peered from behind the curtain. Val tipped his hat. "Mrs. Briggs." "Mercer." Thomas did not answer the greeting. Vale looked around the yard with mild amusement. "I see you've made improvements." Phoebe's hand gripped the porch rail. "Why are you here?" T.O. settled. "Remaining matters." Thomas walked toward him. "There are no remaining matters." Vale drew a folded paper from his coat. "On the contrary, certain movable goods from the original Briggs estate were not included in the land sale and remain subject to Caesar. 1 trunk, 1 mule, 2 hens, assorted tools, and any household goods not affixed to the property." Phoebe went white. Clara said, "No." Val's gaze slid to the child. "Children should not interrupt business." Thomas stopped at the foot of the porch steps. "Leave." Val's smile thinned. You bought the land, Mercer, not the widow's obligations. Unless you intend to satisfy them. How much? Phoebe turned. No, Vale named a sum large enough to be wicked and small enough to reveal its pettiness. Thomas laughed once, without humor. For a lame mule and a cracked trunk, for lawful debt, for punishment, Phoebe said. Vale looked at her. Mrs. Briggs, sentiment does not alter arithmetic. Had your husband conducted himself with greater care, Thomas moved so fast the buggy horse sidestepped. He did not strike Vale. He wanted to. Instead, he took hold of the buggy wheel and held it. Say another word about her husband, Thomas said, and you can walk back to town carrying that wheel. Vale's face tightened. Freaks are not wise. Neither is theft wearing a clean collar. Phoebe came down one step. Thomas, he heard warning in her voice. Not fear for Vale, fear for him. Vale noticed it too and smiled again. How touching. Has Mercer explained, Mrs. Briggs, that his claim depends on my bank's recorded sale? If he challenges my fees too loudly, his own title might become unpleasantly tangled. Perhaps he is less eager to risk his investment than his temper suggests. The words found their mark. Thomas had considered that very thing in the courthouse. If the sale had been crooked, his deed might not stand. If his deed did not stand, everything he had put into the ranch could vanish into court dust. Worse, Vale might sell the land again to somebody with fewer scruples and more cash. Phoebe looked at Thomas, reading enough in his silence. Vale tucked the paper back into his coat. I'll return with Sheriff Calder in 2 days. Have the goods ready, or the money. He lifted the reins. Jonah burst from the side of the house and hurled something at the buggy. It struck the wheel and fell in the mud. A nail. You leave Mama's trunk, he shouted. Vale's horse startled. Vale cursed under his breath, then composed himself. Teach your children manners, Mrs. Briggs. Phoebe ran to Jonah and pulled him close. Thomas picked the nail from the mud. He held it in his fist as Vale drove away. 2 days. That night, Phoebe packed the trunk. Thomas found her in the children's room after supper, folding the black dress, the letters, the primer, the stopped watch. The blue ribbon was tied around the letters now. What are you doing? Making it easier. No, she did not look at him. They will come with the sheriff. If there's a scene, the children will remember it all their lives. Better they wake and it is gone. You're giving him Silas' watch? I'm choosing which wound is smallest. Thomas crossed the room and shut the trunk lid. Phoebe's eyes flashed. Do not. He doesn't get it. You cannot stop him without risking the ranch. The ranch isn't worth that. She stared as if he had spoken nonsense. Thomas said, no land is worth a boy thinking nails are all he has between his mother and the world. Her anger broke then, not into tears, but into something quieter. You don't understand, she said. I already lost the land. I lost the cattle. I lost the bed where my husband died, and the cradle all 3 children slept in. Every time I fought, something else was taken. And afterward people told me I should have been wiser, softer, quicker, quieter. I am so tired of being told dignity is expensive. Thomas's voice dropped. Then let me pay. No, the word came sharp. He flinched. Phoebe put both hands on the trunk. Do you hear yourself? That is the kindness men offer when they still stand above you. Let me pay. Let me decide. Let me save you. And then one day, whether he means to or not, the man remembers the price. Thomas was silent. She looked at him with tears finally standing in her eyes. I will not have my children living under a debt they can feel at the supper table. Thomas understood then, not all of it, but enough to be ashamed of the shape his help had taken. He stepped back. What would protect your dignity? He asked. Phoebe seemed unprepared for the question. The truth, she said, after a long moment. If there is truth in those papers, bring it into daylight. Do not buy him off in secret and call it mercy. Thomas nodded slowly. Then I'll go to Salem, Territorial Land Office. I know a freight man leaving tomorrow. There are copies of auction notices, bank filings, probate transfers, Val's papers in Willow Creek. My smile, but might be the ones elsewhere showed teeth. That road takes 4 days hard travel. Then I leave before dawn. Phoebe looked toward the sleeping children. Ruth had one arm flung over her head. Jonah's boots sat beside his bed, lying perfectly. Clara slept curled around her sister, still guarding even in dreams. Vale comes in too, Phoebe said. I know. Then what happens here? Thomas took a breath. You let him come. You let the sheriff see. You do not give him the trunk. You do not strike him. You do not beg him. Make him show the town what he is. Phoebe shook her head. That is easy for a man to say. Yes. He accepted that too. She looked at him a long while. Then she untied the blue ribbon from the letters and held it out. What is this? Ah, foolish thing, she said. Clara will want something to know you mean to return. Thomas took the ribbon carefully. Their fingers touched. Phoebe said, This is not permission to be reckless. No, and no. And not permission to leave us with hope half-made. No. She looked away. Then go. Thomas rode before sunrise with the ribbon folded inside Eleanor's locket cloth. When the children woke, Jonah ran to the barn first. Clara stood in the yard, pretending not to search the road. Ruth asked if Mr. Tall had gone to bring back more candy. Phoebe said, He went to bring back the truth. Clara's mouth tightened. Truth takes too long. Phoebe looked down the road where Thomas had vanished into morning fog. Yes, she said, it often does. Vale came on the second afternoon. He brought Sheriff Calder, Amos Greer, and 2 men with a wagon. He also brought half the town's curiosity. Women stood by the front gate whispering behind gloved hands. Boys climbed the fence. Mrs. Acker from the laundry came too, her face pinched with worry. Phoebe had washed the children and dressed them cleanly. Clara wore her new boots and stood straight. Jonah held no nails, only the china hen. Ruth sat on the porch with a shawl around her shoulders. The trunk remained in the children's room. Val stepped from his buggy with a paper in hand. Mrs. Briggs. Phoebe stood on the porch. Mr. Val. Sheriff Calder looked uncomfortable. Phoebe, I'm sorry. Are you here as neighbor or law sheriff? He winced. Law, then be law carefully. A murmur moved through the watching townsfolk. Vale cleared his throat. We will proceed without drama. The debt has not been satisfied. The listed items will be removed. Phoebe's hands were cold but steady. Show the list to Sheriff Calder. Let him read it aloud. Vale frowned. There is no need. There is if you've come to take a widow's trunk in front of her children, someone whispered. Greer looked away. Sheriff Calder took the paper. His face reddened as he read, silently. Alad, Phoebe said. The sheriff swallowed. 1 travel trunk, pine, damaged lock. 1 mule, aged. 2 laying hens. 1 box hand tools. Kitchen crockery assorted. 1 family timepiece. Jonah made a small broken sound at timepiece. Phoebe did not move. Mrs. Acker stepped forward. Edwin Vale, shame on you. Vale turned cold eyes on her. That is not shame. Refusing to honor it is. Clara stepped to the edge of the porch. My mama honors everything. Clara, Phoebe said softly. But Clara's face had gone pale with fury. She honored Pa when he was sick. She honored the hens when they wouldn't lay. She honored Mrs. Greer's laundry even when Mr. Greer said ugly things. You don't honor. You take. The yard went silent. Val's jaw tightened. Remove the goods. The 2 men hesitated. Sheriff Calder folded the paper. Vale maybe. We ought to wait until Mercer returns. My claim is not against Mercer. No, Phoebe said. Only against those you think cannot fight. Vale stepped toward the porch. That was when Ruth began coughing. The sound was sudden and harsh, dragging from deep in her chest. Phoebe turned at once, lifting her, rubbing her back. Ruth gasped and clutched Phoebe's collar. The watching crowd shifted, sympathy moving like wind through grass. Val's impatience flashed. "Take the trunk first." The men moved toward the door. Jonah ran to block them, small bodies shaking. "No," one man stopped. "I ain't moving a boy." Val snapped. "Then move around him." Phoebe handed Ruth to Clara and came down the steps. She did not scream. She did not plead. She stood between the men and the door. "You might take goods," she said, "but you will look at me while you do it. You will not pretend this is paper moving from one drawer to another. You will see the children whose blankets you count, the dead man whose watch you price, and the woman whose name you turned into an account." Val's face hardened. "Fine words do not pay." "No," Phoebe said, "but they might yet cost you." A horse came hard down the road. Everyone turned. Thomas Mercer rode into the yard on Jasper, lathered, dark with sweat. Behind him came another rider in a dusty black coat and spectacles, and behind that rider came a freight wagon driven by a man with a red beard. Thomas swung down before Jasper fully stopped. He looked travel-worn, unshaven, and furious in the quietest way. Val's expression flickered. Thomas walked to Phoebe first. He did not touch her, not in front of them all. He only looked at her as if making sure she still stood. Then he said, "I came back." Phoebe's breath caught, but she nodded. Thomas turned to the sheriff. "Calder, this is Mr. Henry Bell, clerk from the Territorial Land Office." The man in spectacles removed his hat. "Sheriff." Val laughed once. "This is absurd." "Likely," Thomas said. "You can explain it." Henry Bell opened a leather satchel and removed several papers, each sealed and folded. "I have certified copies of filings regarding the Briggs property, the creditor's sale, and required public notices." Val's face lost color. Thomas looked at the crowd. The sale notice was filed as posted in 3 locations: Church Door, Courthouse Board, and Briggs Ranch Gate. "It was never on the church door," Mrs. Acker said. "Nor the courthouse board," Sheriff Calder added slowly. "Well, I would have seen it." Thomas held up another paper. The notice claimed Mrs. Briggs was informed by letter. Letter was returned undelivered. Val filed sale anyway. Val snapped. "Technical irregularities do not erase debt." "No," Henry Bell said. "But they might void the sale." The words struck the yard like thunder. Phoebe gripped the porch rail. Thomas continued, voice steady. "There's more. Charges added after Silas Briggs died. Storage fees for items seized and sold. Interest calculated twice over. Doctors Lynn included, though Dr. Haskell says he never filed one." Dr. Haskell stepped through the gate then, breathless from hurrying. "I did not." Val looked trapped now, but not beaten. Men like him always kept one knife hidden. "If the sale is void," he said, "then Mercer has no ranch. The property returns to debt proceedings. The widow cannot pay. The bank will sell again properly. And perhaps next time the buyer will not be so sentimental." A hush fell. There it was. The cost. Thomas could keep quiet and keep his deed. Or he could fight the sale and lose the only land he had bought after years of drifting. He could return to emptiness with his money gone and his pride intact. Or he could stand beside Phoebe Briggs and her children with nothing certain under his boots. Phoebe looked at him. Her eyes told him she understood. She would not ask. That was who she was. She would carry her trunk into the road before she begged a man to ruin himself. Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out the deed. For a moment he saw the ranch as he had first wanted it. Silent rooms, cattle in the pasture, no small booths by the stove, no fevered child calling him Mr. Tall, no woman covering coffee with a saucer, because she had noticed he came in cold. Then he tore the deed in half. A sound rose from the crowd. Val stared. "You fool." Thomas tore it again and let the pieces fall into the mud. "No," he said. "I was a fool when I bought an empty ranch and believed that meant nobody had been emptied out of it." Phoebe's hand went to her mouth. Thomas faced Sheriff Calder. Record that I will not defend my title under a false sale. Record also that I am bringing complaint against Edwin Vale for fraudulent notice and unlawful fees. Mr. Bell has agreed to witness. Sheriff Calder stood taller than he had all afternoon. I'll record it. Vale's eyes glittered. And when the debt remains, when the bank calls every note, will you tear up money too? Thomas looked at Phoebe, then at Clara, Jonah, and Ruth. I'll buy the debt, he said. Phoebe stepped down. Thomas, no. He turned to her. Not the ranch, not you. The debt, then I'll mark it paid in Silas Briggs' name. She shook her head, tears bright now. That is too much. Not if it buys nothing. What does that mean? Thomas looked at the crowd so every ear heard. It means Mrs. Phoebe Briggs owes me no labor, no favor, no gratitude, no future, and no place at my table unless she chooses it freely. The children are not part of any bargain. The ranch was theirs before I came, and I'll spend what I have making sure no man can steal it cleanly again. The yard stayed silent. Then Mrs. Acker began to cry. Amos Greer stared at his boots. Vale climbed into his buggy with stiff, jerking motions. This is not finished. Thomas picked up the nail Jonah had thrown days before, still lying near the porch where someone had kicked it aside. Yes, he said. Just not the way you priced it. Vale drove away alone. The men with the wagon did not follow at first. They looked at Phoebe, ashamed, then climbed up slowly and turned their team around. The townsfolk drifted off in murmurs, carrying a story that would grow and change by supper. Sheriff Calder stayed long enough to shake Thomas's hand and apologize to Phoebe, in a voice rough with embarrassment. Dr. Haskell checked Ruth's breathing and left whorehound candy without asking payment. Mrs. Acker hugged Phoebe, then Clara, then Ruth, then startled Jonah by hugging him too. At last the yard emptied. Only the ranch remained, the broken fence, the muddy D-pieces, the blue sky after storm, the children on the porch watching the adults as if the whole world had tilted and not yet settled. Phoebe came down the steps. Thomas suddenly felt every mile he had ridden. He bent to gather the torn deed pieces from the mud because he could not bear standing still beneath her gaze. Leave them, she said. He straightened. Her face was pale. Her eyes were wet, but there was no helplessness in her, only the terrible dignity of a woman who had been seen in her need and had not been made smaller by it. You should not have done that, she said. I know, you might lose everything. I know. The ranch might still be tied up for months. I expect so. You have nowhere else? He looked toward the barn. I have Jasper, a bedroll, bad coffee, Ruth whispered loudly from the porch. He can sleep in the barn. Clara hushed her, but not sharply. Phoebe almost laughed. Instead, she wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. Thomas said, I can go if you want. Once the filings are started, I won't make my sacrifice another weight in your house. Phoebe took one step closer. You keep saying my house. It is. Then hear me inside it. Her voice trembled but held. You will not ride off and leave my children thinking men who protect them vanish by morning. Thomas could not speak. Phoebe looked down at his bandaged wrist, the one she had wrapped days before. The linen was dirty from travel. That needs changing, she said. It was not a confession. It was not a promise. It was a door left open. Thomas nodded. Yes, ma'am, Phoebe. He looked at her. She said it again, quieter. Phoebe, behind them, Jonah whispered. Does this mean we keep the mule? Clara said. Hush. Thomas looked at Phoebe, and this time the smile that touched her mouth stayed long enough to be real. Yes, Jonah, she said. We keep the mule. Summer came in pieces. The legal matters did not mend quickly. Nothing involving paper ever did. Vale fought, then retreated when too many witnesses remembered too many things. The bank directors in Portland disliked scandal more than mercy, and Henry Bell disliked irregular filings more than both. In the end, Thomas spent nearly all the money he had saved from 10 years of cattle work, not to buy the ranch again, but to clear the debt that had been wrapped around it like wire. Phoebe signed the final papers herself. She read every line. Thomas stood outside the courthouse while she did it, because she asked him to. When she came out, she held the paper in both hands. For a moment, she said nothing. The children were waiting in the wagon, Jonah half asleep, Ruth sticky with candy, Clara trying to pretend she had not been watching the courthouse door every breath. Phoebe handed the paper to Clara. "Read the name," she said. Clara frowned down at the line, sounding out the formal words. Then her eyes widened. "Phoebe Briggs," she whispered. Phoebe nodded. "Not the bank, no, not Mr. Mercer, no." Clara looked at Thomas. He tipped his hat. "Told you I was likely a fool." Clara studied him with solemn judgment. "My bay the good kind." That became enough. Thomas stayed through highing because the west fence needed 2 men, and because the barn roof still leaked over the tack wall, and because Ruth cried when he took Jasper too near the road. He stayed through harvest because Phoebe's beans came in heavy, and the potatoes needed digging. He stayed through the first frost because the chimney smoked unless the wind was right, and he knew how to set a new flue stone. Folks in town talked. Then they tired of talking when nothing shameful came of it. Phoebe kept her name, her house, and her say. Thomas kept to the barn until November, when snow came early, and Clara, with all the authority of 10 years old, declared that letting a man freeze 10 yards from a warm stove was wasteful. Phoebe said the spare room off the kitchen had a bed if Thomas wished to use it. She said it while looking into the flour barrel, as if the flour had asked. Thomas moved in 1 trunk, 1 rifle, 2 shirts, Eleanor's locket, and a pair of boots that needed soles. The locket he kept in the top drawer of the washstand. One evening Phoebe saw it while putting away folded linen. She did not open it. Thomas stood in the doorway. "You can." She looked back. "Only if you hand it to me." So he did. They sat at the kitchen table while the children slept and the wind pushed snow against the dark windows. Phoebe opened the locket and looked at the curl of hair, the faded violet. "She was pretty," she said. "She was kind." "That is better." "Yes." "How long were you married?" 11 months. Phoebe closed her eyes bravely. "Oh, Thomas." He accepted the locket back, but his hand shook once. "I was angry after," he said, not loud. Worse, quiet. Folks stopped asking me to supper. I made that easy for them. Grief can make a locked room of a person. He looked at her. She touched the stopwatch on the table between them. Silas' watch. Thomas had repaired it in September, though Phoebe still wound it only on Sundays. "I loved Silas," she said. "Sometimes I was angry with him after he died. Then I was ashamed of being angry. Then angry at the shame. There is no tidy way to miss someone who left you with children and debt and memories good enough to hurt." Thomas said nothing because nothing was needed. Phoebe looked at the locket. "You do not have to empty that room to sit in this while." The line went through him clean. He looked down at his hands. After a while he said, "I don't know how to be a husband and not fear a grave at the end of every kindness." Phoebe's voice was soft. "I don't know how to be a wife and not fear a ledger behind every gift." The stove pot. Outside, the mule brayed once, offended by snow or resistance. Thomas gave a short laugh. Phoebe smiled. Then silence settled, not empty this time, full. By Christmas the ranch had changed so much that travelers sometimes passed the gate and slowed to look. The fence stood straight along the road. The barn roof held. Smoke rose clean from the chimney. Curtains hung in the windows, not yellow flowers like Eleanor had once wanted, but blue calico Phoebe chose because Ruth said it looked like morning. The hens had multiplied under Jonah's supervision. Clara had a slate for lessons and used it at night after chores. her tongue caught between her teeth, determined to read contracts better than any banker in Oregon. Ruth grew rounder in the cheeks and followed Thomas everywhere, asking questions no grown man could answer without confessing ignorance. Why do horses sleep standing? So they can leave quick. Why don't people? Because we fall over. Did you fall over when you were little? Likely often. Did someone pick you up? Thomas looked across the yard at Phoebe shaking a rug over the porch rail. Yes, he said. Eventually, on Christmas Eve, Willow Creek held a church supper. Phoebe did not want to go. Thomas knew because she polished the same spoon 3 times and said the roads might ice. Clara said, "We should go." Phoebe looked surprised. "You want to?" Clara lifted her chin. "I have boots." So they went. The church smelled of pine boughs, lamp oil, wet wool, and pies. People turned when Phoebe entered with her children and Thomas behind them. For one hard breath, the old shame tried to rise. Then Mrs. Acker came forward and took Phoebe's arm. Dr. Haskell gave Ruth peppermint. Sheriff Calder asked Jonah about the hens, as if the matter were of civic importance. Amos Greer, red-faced and stiff, approached with his hat in both hands. "Mrs. Briggs," he said. Phoebe turned. Greer swallowed. "I spoke wrong last spring. More than once. My wife has made that clear, and I knew it before she did. I'm sorry." The room listened. Phoebe did not rush to rescue him from discomfort. Thomas admired her for that. At last she said, "Thank you, Mr. Greer." Greer looked relieved, then glanced at Thomas. "Mercer." Thomas nodded. Clara leaned toward Jonah and whispered, "That's what shame looks like when it has to wear Sunday clothes." Jonah snorted cider up his nose. Phoebe gave them both a look, but her mouth trembled. Later, after supper, the children joined others near the stove. Ruth fell asleep against Clara's side. Jonah traded 2 brown eggs, promised for later delivery, for a carved whistle. Clara read aloud from a hymn book to a younger child who could not yet manage the words. Phoebe stood near the back of the church watching them. Thomas came beside her. "You did that?" he said. She shook her head. "We did pieces. You did the first pieces." She glanced at him. "You brought bacon." A powerful courtship. Her eyes warmed, but she looked away. "Thomas," he waited. "I'm not grateful in the way people expect women like me to be. I know I will not be rescued into silence. I'd be disappointed if you were." She folded her hands, then unfolded them. "I love my home. I love my children more. I know, and if I ever marry again, it will not be because I need a roof." Thomas's heart beat once hard. "No," he said. "It won't." She looked at him fully then. The lamp softened the lines worry had left on her face. She was not the woman he had found in the rain, though that woman was still there. The brave bones of her. She was Phoebe Briggs, who had stood before a wagon and made men see what they were taking. She was a mother, a teacher, a widow, a woman with flour on her sleeve and law in her hand. She was nobody's bargain. Thomas said, "If I ever ask, it won't be for a roof either. What would it be for?" He took a long breath. "For coffee covered with a saucer," he said. "For Jonah's hen judging me from fence posts. For Ruth asking questions until I don't know my own name. For Clara calling me a good kind of fool. For a table that sounds different when you're sitting at it." Phoebe's eyes shone. "That is not a proper proposal," she whispered. "No, good?" He looked startled. She smiled then, small and real. "I have had enough of proper papers to last a lifetime." He laughed softly, and she did too, and nobody in the church knew that something solemn had passed between them without kneeling, rings, or speeches. Spring returned with meadowlarks on the fence wire. Thomas asked in April, not in church and not in town, but in the garden where Phoebe was planting beans. He had Ruth's help, which meant the secret had been announced 3 times before breakfast. Clara pretended not to know. Jonah placed the china hen beside the bean row for courage. Thomas stood with his hat in his hands. Phoebe looked up from the soil. "You are blocking, my son. I can move. You can speak first." He knelt, though not on one knee like a storybook gentleman. Both knees went into the dirt because the garden was soft from rain, and because he was not a graceful man. "I don't want your ranch," he said. "I know. I don't want your gratitude. I know. I don't want to replace Silas." Her face softened. "I know." He swallowed. "I want to stay where the stove is warm and the work matters. I want to help raise children who already know too much about fear and not enough about being safe. I want to sit beside you when the day is done, whether we talk or not. Phoebe Briggs, will you marry me because you choose to, and for no other reason?" She looked at him for a long time. Then she held out one muddy hand. He took it. "Yes," she said. "Because I choose to," Ruth shouted from behind the rain barrel. "She said yes," Clara said. "We heard." Jonah picked up the china hen and kissed its cracked head. "Told you." They married in June under the cottonwood near the repaired gate. Phoebe wore the brown dress she had altered with blue ribbon at the collar. Clara stood beside her holding wildflowers. Jonah carried the rings in a little pouch and checked them every 8 seconds. Ruth scattered rose petals Mrs. Acker had brought from town, though she mostly dropped them in clumps and then picked some back up because that one was too pretty to step on. Thomas wore his best black coat, brushed until the seams shone. Inside his pocket, he carried Eleanor's locket, not hidden in shame, but present like a blessing from another room of his life. Phoebe carried Silas' watch wound and ticking. When the vows came, Thomas's voice roughened only once. Phoebe's did not break at all, though her eyes filled when Clara slipped her small hand into Thomas's after the preacher said family. Afterward, there was food on long boards set across barrels: beans, biscuits, ham, pickles, berry pies, coffee, and lemonade for the children. Sheriff Calder danced badly with Mrs. Acker. Dr. Haskell fell asleep in a chair. Amos Greer brought sugar at cost and did not mention it. Veo did not come. Nobody missed him. At sunset, after the guests had gone and the children were worn out from happiness, Phoebe stood on the porch looking over the yard. The ranch was not grand. It never would be. The barn still leaned a little. The pump squeaked in dry weather. The kitchen floor had stains no scrubbing could remove. The fence line needed watching. The hens escaped. The mule hated everyone equally, and money still mattered in every sack of flour and every horseshoe nail. But the woodpile was full. The garden was green. Clean curtains moved in the evening breeze. 3 pairs of children's shoes sat by the door, dusty from play instead of flight. Inside, Ruth slept with one hand open beside her cheek. Jonah's china hen rested on the windowsill, facing the moon. Clara's slate lay on the table with a sentence written carefully across it: "This ranch belongs to us." Phoebe found Thomas standing in the kitchen, looking at those words. "She wrote it 5 times before choosing that one," Phoebe said. Thomas nodded. His throat worked. Phoebe set a cup of coffee near him and covered it with a saucer, though he was already there. He looked at the cup, then at her. From the porch, evening light touched her hair and the blue ribbon at her collar. She was tired. So was he. The good kind of tired earned by work and noise and children who needed water after being tucked in. Thomas reached for her hand. She gave it. No one watching would have called it a grand gesture. Just a man and a woman standing in a kitchen that had once smelled of cold ashes and fear, holding hands beside a rough table while the stove cooled and the last light faded. But some miracles come quietly. A deed torn in mud, a trunk left unopened, a child's boots by the door, a woman's name restored to paper, a ranch that was never empty after all. And if you ever pass through old Oregon Trail country and see a small house with blue curtains, a straight fence, and meadowlarks singing over bean rows. Remember this, land might be bought, but home is made by the ones who stay, the ones who return, and the ones who learn to say, without shame or fear, "This belongs to us."